Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. We got the not so downhill Dodge in front of the shop today for some surgery. This is a 24 valve Cummins with the VP44 pump, and that's the one of the few weak spots of these trucks. So this truck unfortunately is in need of one. The electronics in the pump fuck off and you get throttle issues and not responsive, and revs up on its own. Just weird stuff goes on. I tried replacing the apps, the accelerator pedal position sensor, under this cover, and you take these screws out. The sensor's in the back. It's a throttle position sensor. Tried replacing that. It was a cheaper attempt at fixing my problem. Didn't do anything, so I'm gonna have to replace the pump. I got a pump ready to go, so we're going to start by taking off some stuff that's in the way. The intake horn, there's I think four bolts that take this horn off, and you could probably just flop it out of the way or take off the T-bolt clamps and just remove it. And of course the dipstick is attached to that, so you'll want to deal with that as well. The bracket that the apps attaches to, 3 bolts, that'll come off. You'll have the throttle cable still attached, but you can just flop that out of the way. And then once we get in a little more, we'll take some injection lines off. Now here we are looking at the injection pump. I want to take the plug off the pump. There's this clip here, or a latch I guess you'd call it. You pull it back like towards you if you're standing on the side of the truck on the driver's side. And then I probably can't do this one-handed. Okay, so I got the plug off. I did not pull the locking tab out quite far enough, which is why I was having trouble. One thing to check, especially right before you put the new pump on, put the new plug on, make sure all those connections are nice and clean. I can still see some that blue dielectric grease in there, so there's no connection issues here that were giving me trouble. I've also got this wire here. This is a tap wire for my Edge juice tuner. So I'm going to take that wire tap off, and I'm going to have to figure out what wire to tap into on the new pump when I put this back on. There are 2 wires over there. And after that, there's 2 fuel fittings here on the side of the pump. This one here is a return line. It's a banjo fitting return line. And over here, if your truck is stock, you'll have also another banjo bolt and fuel line coming from your lift pump. I have an Air Dog pump, so this is some sort of an adapter with a quick connect and a big 1/2-inch hose. So I imagine I'll pull that lock out and take this hose off. Alright, now we want to remove the breather cover and the tube. So I undid one of these awful fucking spring clamps, pulled it up a bit, and pulled the tube off. Then you can get a chain wrench or some big channel locks or something. Turn this a little bit and that'll come off. That'll expose the injection pump gear, which is inside the timing case. Alright, so behind that breather cover is the injection pump nut, and behind the nut there's a washer. So we're going to crack this loose. I think it might be a metric size, I don't know. I think it's 1 1/16" on my wrench, and it fits just fine, so I'll put it on there, give it a bump or two, and it ought to break it loose. Carefully take it out, make sure it doesn't fall down in the case, and then very carefully take the washer off. Make sure that doesn't fall down in the case. If it does, you gotta take the timing case off to fish it out. So to get that nut loose, I did have to use the socket wrench and a pipe on the handle of the wrench, and just pushing it evenly, or even giving it some decent jerks, did just rotate the whole motor over. So you have to just keep repeating that process. Just jerk it as fast as you can, as hard as you can, take up all the slack in the ratchet, and then really jerk it. Try to make like an impact wrench out of your arm and out of that pipe, and after a couple attempts you'll feel it loosen, then it'll come right off. Alright, so here we are with the nut and washer off. You can see the face of the gear, and you can see up there is the keyway at 9 o'clock, and there's one of the holes, threaded holes. There's another one 180 degrees from it, Those are puller holes. That's where you're going to put your bolt puller to pop that gear off. And the gear doesn't come totally off, it just loosens from the shaft. And when it's loose from the shaft, it cannot lose time to the other gears. The gear just floats in there, so you don't have to worry about retiming anything or remeshing any gears. But you do need to loosen the gear off the shaft so you can pull the pump with the shaft out. So what we're going to do is rotate the engine over until that keyway is up top at 12 o'clock. That'll do two things. It'll make it easier to align the keyway when you're reinstalling the new pump, and it will also prevent the possibility of the old key falling out of the shaft and falling down into the timing cover when you pull the old pump out. Because if it's at the bottom, it should be kind of stuck in there, but if not, it'll fall out and there'll be another problem. Then after that keyway is rotated up to 12 o'clock, put a bolt puller in there and pop it off. It'll be a little tight, but I guess there ought to be enough space to work. Now, to bar the engine over to get the keyway on top, you could do a couple different things. Some people talk about using the alternator nut, but I've never had much luck. It just slips the belt. I put a wrench on this fan hub nut there, and that worked great. I guess you could also put a strap wrench or something around the balancer. And Cummins also has an engine barring tool that goes through a hole in the bell housing, but why would you want to crawl down the ground, crank it over, get up again, look at it over here? I think this was definitely the easiest way to go. Then what you can also do is remove this group of injection lines. Don't remove these clamps. If you keep these clamps on, and that'll keep these three lines together as an assembly, just remove the nuts from the pump and then follow the lines and remove the corresponding nuts. I think this is 1, 2, and 4. Let's see, this line is 4, that line is 2 and 1. Yeah, either way, just take it off and remove this as an assembly, and then this rear set of 3, leave them attached to the injectors, but take them off of the pump. Alright, here's the bolt puller installed in place. It's just a Harbor Freight bolt puller, but it's done a lot of work for me. It works pretty well. There's some sort of metric bolts, I don't know what size they are. They're similar to a 5/16. So I got the bolts threaded in and got the center installed. Everything's tightened up, so now I gotta somehow snake a wrench in there, tighten it, and hopefully I don't need to use the trick of hitting the end of the puller to jar it loose, because I sure can't do that with the radiator in the way. Okay, so I got the gear loose. I got this as tight as I possibly could by hand. It's really tough because you have the radiator, the fan blade, and this stupid cover in the way. But I got it as tight as I could, and I just took the handle of a wrench and I just tapped on the main center screw and just popped loose. So that's it. It's on a taper, so once it's free, it's free. So I'm going to take the puller out and then go on to a bracket. Alright, now back there somewhere, there it is, illuminated in the center of the screen. There's two 13mm bolts. You can see the head of one of them just below that injection line. Two 13mm bolts to hold a bracket to the block. The bracket is attached to the pump. We'll take the bracket off the pump after the pump comes off, but take off those two bolts from the bracket and then remove these four 15mm nuts that hold the injection pump to the timing case. Gonna need some extensions for the nuts over there, and then the pump is ready to come off. Alright, the pump is loose. You can see it's wobbling around. There's an O-ring that seals the pump into the case, so it's pretty much just stuck on that. So just do some jerking and wobbling, and I got this thin bar to gently get in there and pry it loose. Don't be too forceful with it, of course, and we'll get the pump out. Alright, got it out. It also is stuck on a dowel pin right there, but again, just wobble it and gentle prying will get it right off. Here's the bracket we need to replace or remove and put onto the new pump. Just some Torx fittings there. And another thing to note, don't rotate the pump shaft at all when you take the old pump out, because you can stand it up on end and compare the keyway location on your old pump to the new pump, so you can get this as aligned as it can possibly be, so it'll ease your installation of the new pump. Okay, so here's the new pump. Installed the bracket, T50 Torx. I liberally oiled the O-ring on there and also the taper. I preloaded the threaded studs with RTV or with anti-seize, and also the hole that the O-ring goes into, I also coated that with engine oil for lubrication and ease of installation. So we're ready to slide this back in place. So when it's going back in, do it very gradually and slowly. Make sure that the key on your new pump is nice and tight in there. I've tried to move it and pick it out by hand and it doesn't want to move. So that's good, it's not going to fall out. And once you get it close in place, look in this way or look in that way with a mirror or a flexible camera thing or something to make sure the keyway or the key is going into the keyway in the gear. You don't want it to obviously be misaligned and you'll mash the keyway and timing will be off, it'll be no good. So really take your time putting it back in. Well, those injection lines are definitely a pain. They do get in the way. I took that bolt out. It didn't help. But I finally got it in place. It just fell right in. I was cautious because it went in so easily. I wasn't sure if I got the key in because it was just so easy. But if you look in here with a light, looking in here, it is possible to see the key going into the keyway. I can't really show you with the camera with the light. The camera just doesn't agree. It kind of overexposes because of the light and you just can't see it. But trust me, it's tight, but you can see it with the pump, you know, about 3/8 or ½ inch, I guess ½ inch away from the block. So make sure it's in there and slide it home. And once it's in there, you can of course put the nuts on and put that main nut on with the washer. So I used a combination of a flashlight and the camera on my cell phone to look into the keyway, verify that the key is in the keyway. I also felt around with a pick to make sure I could feel the keyway in there. And we're all set, so I put the washer and nut on, torqued it to 125 foot-pounds. Right around that torque is when it started to turn the motor over. So I did the same jerking thing with the wrench, with the torque wrench, and I could hear the torque wrench click. So I did that a few times. Nuts torqued, that's all set. So I put in the 2 bolts in the back there on the bracket, tighten those down, tighten down the 4 15mm headed nuts holding the pump to the case. Now we can start attaching the injection lines. Okay, so now I want to attach this Edge Juice programmer wire onto the injection pump wire. The PosiTap wire tap that came off the old pump, it's got these little plastic threads they stripped out. It's just kind of a one-time use thing. So luckily my friend down the road happened to have one. It's the next size bigger, but it should work fine. However, I improved and modified the setup a little bit. Firstly, the back side of this PosiTap is supposed to have another threaded insert, so you just strip your wire, stuff it in the insert, and then crank the nut down, and it just splays this stripped wires onto a stud that's in here. But I didn't have that last little piece, so I cut the plastic off so there was a metal stud sticking out. I soldered just the metal part of a butt connector onto the stud and onto a piece of wire. And yeah, I know I should have showed you this before I put the shrink tube on. But anyway, so that's what I did. Heat shrunk everything. This heat shrink has the glue in the inside, and that lump there, that's just the extra ball of solder. Anyway, glue inside the heat shrink, and then I put a spade connector on the other end. And I also put a matching mating spade connector on the edge juice wire. So now, once I thread this wire on, or pierce it on, it's on there, and if I ever need to take the wire off, I can just undo this spade connector rather than unthreading this posi tap. And I do have this one last large piece of shrink tube, so once I plug these together, I can slide the shrink tube over and heat shrink the spade connection. But what I will do is I'll only shrink one end and then the other end to create a seal, but I'm not going to shrink the whole thing so the glue doesn't get into that spade connector, so it'll be easier to pull apart if I ever need to. Alright, well, it's mostly back together. Put the throttle sensor bracket back on, put the air horn intake back on, the fuel supply and return is back on, and just a little piece of advice: these are banjo fittings, and the pump came with new banjo washers, but I always keep these old ones. You never know if you're going to drop one or lose one or whatever, and I even keep these in the shop, just in one of my parts drawers, just in case some project down the road requires one. These particular washers are not copper washers, they're metal with a rubber thing on the inside, so they stick on the bolt pretty well, they're not going to fall off. And I left these injection line nuts loose up top. I also loosened number 3, even though that's on the back set of injection lines that I didn't take off. I loosened this one just to help bleed it, so number 5 and 6, they're probably a little bit full of air, but the air will work out once we get this running. If you really want, you can reach back there and loosen those nuts, but you don't have to. So 1 through 4 injection lines are loose. Plugged the injection pump plug back in and slid that connector in, so that's locked in place. Put the apps sensor back in. Now I can put that breather cover back on and reattach the tube. Okay, so now we want to bleed the air out of the injection pump and fill it up with fuel. I loosened the return line. I'm not sure if that'll work, so if that doesn't work, I'm gonna take the hose off here and loosen the inlet line. But what we want to do is turn the key on and just give it a quick bump. Don't crank it over to try to start, just give it a quick bump and shut it off again, and that will trigger the fuel pump to run for, I think, 25 seconds. So that'll pump fuel into the fuel line, fill up the pump, and hopefully it'll come out the return. And if for some reason it doesn't, I'll just, like I said, I'll loosen the inlet. And then once you see fuel coming out here, everything's bled on the low pressure supply side. Tighten the fittings back up, and we'll crank it over again with these injection lines loose until you see fuel spraying out of the injection lines. Tighten those up and give it a start. Okay, so I did about maybe 3 cycles of the key, and I got fuel coming out of the return line, so I tightened that up. Then I gave it not much cranking, maybe 10 seconds of cranking, and you see there's wet fuel that came out of these injection lines. So we're ready to tighten these up and give it a go. There you have it, it runs. Let's take it for a rip up the road, see how Well, that may have been how to replace the injection pump, but that was not how to fix my dead pedal issue, unfortunately. So that was a bunch of money I guess I didn't need to spend. But I already took the video, got the footage, so that can still educate you people out there for how to replace a VP44 injection pump. And I'll continue to work on this truck, and stay tuned, and we'll get some more updates on what the problem actually is. I did replace the accelerator pedal position sensor and now the injection pump. All the connections are clean. And I did some continuity checks. I found some diagnostic stuff online about, measure from this pin to that pin, see if there's continuity or no continuity. If sometimes there is continuity, that means two wires are shorted together, or if there isn't continuity, it means a wire is broken. I did some of that testing, and everything seemed to check out pretty well. So who the fuck knows? But anyway, that's where we're at right now. And thanks for watching. Leave a thumbs up, or you can leave a thumbs down too, because I'm not too happy. I'm thumbs downing this. But anyway, that's how you replace a pump. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with this downhill Dodge, to see how it's going, and hopefully soon find out the final fix for this. That's all, folks. Thanks for watching. Come on back for more.